Hey class, today what I wanted to do is to do a little quick lecture on how to create a shag rug. Here's a shag rug that I created for this tutorial. And basically I just put it on a wooden floor like you would have a normal wooden floor in a house with a rug on it. Now there's many different ways that you can build a rug like this. You can use a hair and fur system. What I'm going to be using is a particle system. I don't like the hair and fur system for something like a shag rug. I don't think it gives a very believable look, and it's really hard to control, and plus it takes forever to render. I'm going to show you a different way using a particle system to do this rug. Okay, so this is what I've got, and I'll kind of deconstruct this of how I did this. Okay. All right, so here's what I have in Max, and I'm just going to take you in here and show you how I created all this. So let's just start. Go ahead. Basically, I started off with a rectangle, okay? And the way I made mine, you can make your base of your rug any way you want. The way I just show you the way I did mine is I started off with a spline. I built with splines quite a bit. And so I just made a rectangle the size of that I wanted, and then I rounded the edges to give me something like that. Okay, then at that point I can just convert that to an editable poly, and it'll make it into a solid structure. Now I wanted to give a little bit of height to it, so I come in here, pick this poly, and then I do an insert to give me a little bit of an area around it. And then I pull that up, give me a little bit of height to my rug. Too many people just make them paper thin. Rugs really have a depth to them. Then I'm going to grab this border edge. I'm holding down my shift key, and I'm going to pull this down just to give it a little bit of height there. That way I make sure that it's penetrating into the ground. Okay, and that's pretty much how I made my structure. Okay, now later I'll go in and show you can look at this structure I made that has kind of got an irregular pattern to it, and later I'll go in and show you how I did that. Okay, so let's just isolate this. And so this is going to be the structure for my the rug. Okay, now the next thing I needed to make was some fibers, okay, to use. Okay, and let me just show you what I have here. Okay, I've made some little fibers. Okay, now how I made these was pretty easy. I just took a cylinder. Okay, so took and made a little cylinder and gave it 6 sides and gave it a little bit of a height, and then I gave it I think it's got 4 subdivisions in it, okay, like that. And then I twisted it. Okay, so I put a twist modifier on this, and then I twisted it like that. Okay, once I have that, then I went ahead and converted that to a poly. And then I'm not going to, we need to keep our polygon count as small as possible. So I deleted the bottom off of this. We're going to be throwing lots of little particles out there. So, you're going to want to keep this as low as possible in your polygon count. Now, you can see that these are taller and skinnier. Okay. I wanted to go over this part because I see a lot of people do this. They'll come in here and go, okay, now I want to scale this, and then we're going to scale it in to get it, and I want something like that. That's all fine. But when you're using a particle system, as soon as I attach this particle system, it's going to go back to its original shape. Okay. The scale tool, makes it so that the object coordinates and the world coordinates are different. Okay. And a particle system, we use world coordinates. So what you need to do is once you've done that, okay, you're going to go over to your, little hammer tool over here, which is your utilities. You're going to go reset selected, and then you're going to convert this to a poly. Now for Maya users, this is, resetting the transformations, deleting the history and resetting the transformations, which is what you're doing here. Okay. Then at that point, I actually want some of these fibers twisting around each other. So what I'm going to do is to make a copy of this. And I'm going to kind of form a little triangle with those. And then I'm going to attach those together so that they are one object. Now, when I do that, the pivot point won't be in the center. So we'll need to go up here to hierarchy, affect the pivot only, and then center that to the object so that the pivot is in the center of where these objects are. Okay. And I'm going to place it, doesn't have to be perfectly in the center, but by default, it'll be wherever the pivot point of the first object, which is not what we want. So we want it in the center. The other thing we want is the pivot point to be at the bottom. Okay. We want it to be the pivot at the bottom of the object. And the reason we need that is because a pivot point, when we're placing our particle system, it's actually placing the pivot point. So we want our pivot point to be at the bottom so that the particle was placing that part onto the rug. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and put a twist on this. And I'm going to twist that. Okay. Now, if you're getting some funkiness, sometimes you'll get some funkiness on this twist. It may be because the transformation needs to reset. Okay. If that's the case, then just do the same thing again. Go down to your utilities, reset selected, convert it to an editable poly, or freeze transformations if you're in Maya. Okay, so then we're just going to twist that. Something like that. Okay, it's distorting the shape, but that's fine. It's going to be a little particle. And then I'm going to collapse that in. And okay, then the next thing I'm going to do is I actually want 3 versions of this. So I'm going to copy this. Of course, in Max, that's just holding down the shift key. And I'm going to tell them I want 2 copies. Now, these need to be copies, not instances or references. They need to be unique. And then I'm going to come in here and put a bend modifier on this. Okay. So I'm just going to copy that. Okay. And then I can bend this over. Okay. So I'm going to bend it over about that far. I'm going to paste bend on this one. I'm not going to bend it quite as far. And then let's put a bend on this one. And we're not going to go as far as that one. Okay. So that, they're just all bent a little bit different. Okay. Don't want to get it over too far, but something like that's okay. So that there's a variety of them. Now, they don't have to be bent at different directions because when we use the particle system, it's going to spin these in different directions. So that's all that we really care. Okay. At that point, then we can go ahead and convert those to an editable poly. Okay. So that we don't have any of that on the stack. And then we want to group these. So just pick them and group them and just call them, give them a name, whatever you want to call them, call it fibers. Okay. So that's how I generate these fibers. Doesn't matter about the color of them, anything now. We're going to put shaders on them later. Okay. So that's how I created my initial little fibers. Okay. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is create our particle system. Okay. So we're going to create panel. And then right here where we're using our standard primitives that we create in Max, we're going to go to particle systems. Okay. Now, there are several particle systems in here. Most of these are old particle systems. The one we want to use is PF Source. That's the current particle system for Max. It's a node-based particle system, so that's what we want to use. Okay, as soon as you click it, then all you're going to do is come out here and click, hold down, and drag, and you're making an icon. Okay, once you've done that, right-click to stop, and it doesn't matter how big the icon or where the icon is placed. It doesn't matter. It's just something that we can pick in the viewport. Okay. So then you're going to go to your modify panel, and then you're going to click this button that says particle view, and it'll bring up your particle view to create your particle system. Now, by the way, If we close this, 6 on the keyboard is what brings it back up. Okay. All right. So this is our particle system here. And, you know, it's kind of almost like building shaders, really. This is a what's called a standard flow. There are different kinds of ones, but basically this is already preset things for us in here. Okay, some things we're going to want to do on this base node. Okay, so this works kind of like just like in the material editor, in which that when we pick a node, its attributes will come up over here. These are all the different things that we can put into our system down here at the bottom. Okay. And so they've already put a bunch of these nodes in here for us, but we can come back in and change those. Okay. And then if you come in here and you click on any one of these over here on the right, it'll explain to you what each one of these little nodes do. Okay. All right. So we're going to go into our base one here. Now, when you first make it up here at the top where it says viewport, your quantity multiplier, this is what it's going to show. It's going to start off by showing you 50% in the viewport of the 100% of particles it's going to make. Okay. You usually want to change that. I mean, that's for if we're doing, you know, particle systems making smoke and stuff like that, but we actually want to see all our particles. So we're going to change this to 100 instead of the default of 50. Okay. Now, there is a limit in here of 100,000 particles. You can change that, but I keep this so that you don't, you know, freeze your machine up all the time. Okay. We're not going to be doing that much, so we don't have to, make that higher. Okay. Now that's when clicking on this top. Now, if I click on the word render, okay, right here, I get another set of attributes, and this says single mesh. And actually I want to change this to mesh per particle. Okay. So I don't want it to be, when I'm making these particles, I don't want it to be one single mesh. I want a mesh per particle. It's a little bit better to control it. Okay, so we're going to come down here and we're going to pick this one right here. Okay, this is the vent with all of our little things. Okay, so what we're going to do is just go down the list here. Okay, the first is birth. The birth is how many particles is going to be generated. Okay, by default, it animates from 0 to 30. Okay. Since we're not wanting ours to animate, what you do is you change both of these to 0, then the particles won't be animated. Okay. Now we can get in here and see these particles as we generate them. Let's make this a little bit smaller. So as I come in here, they generate, and they're displaying is what's called ticks, little X's. Okay. So you can see it's what it's telling me here. I've got 200 of those. If I hit a 0 behind there, now there's 2,000 of those. Okay. So that's how many particles. This is how you control how many particles. Now, by default, it's going to be doing ticks. Okay. And what we want to do is to go down here to display at the bottom, which is what's showing in our viewport. And we're going to change this to geometry. So it's actually showing me a piece of geometry. Now, by default, the geometry it's showing us is boxes, which that's fine for what we're doing right now. Okay. Now, eventually we're going to change it and it'll be these fibers. Okay. So let's go down the list here. So we've got, that's how many particles we're showing. Okay. Then we're going to go to position icon. Now what this does means this is the position of where we're placing the particles. In this case, we're placing the particles on the icon, but we're going to want to change this. Okay. We want to place our particles on this piece of geometry up here. So you go down here and what you're looking for is position object. Okay. Position icon is what we have. Position object is what we want. So you just click, hold down, and drag this. Now you need to pay attention when you drop it, because if I drop it between them, it adds it in there. Okay. You'll see it turns to a red line over the top of it. That means I'm going to replace that one. So be careful the way you put these in here. Of course, you can always, delete them or add them, but the blue line means put it in between. The red line means replace it. I want to replace that one. So I'm going to drop it on top of there. Okay. So now you'll see our particles go away because it doesn't know where to place them. Okay. So I click on this, pick object, and then right here I can click add, and then I just click on this, and now it's going to put our particles on our object there. Okay. So we're switching position icon to position object, and then we're picking the object. Of course, you could pick multiple objects too in here. You can also go by list, in which that it'll bring objects and you can pick them by a list. You can do that also. Okay. We've got, if we get on the list here, we've got speed. Okay. And actually we can either turn this off. If you click the icons in the front, that turns them off. Okay. Or we can just hit delete and delete it out of there. Okay. Because we're not animating, so we don't need any speed in it. Okay, rotation is the rotation of the particles. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Shape is the particles themselves. Okay, so these are cubes because it's set to cubes. I could come up here and put them diamonds. Okay, you can change different kind of particles that you want to put them in here. Oh, here's hearts. We can make it little pretty hearts, you know. So there's all kinds of things that we can make it. Okay, but we're going to replace this. Okay. Okay, so we're going to take this where it's shape, and we're going to go down here and get one called shape instance. Instance allow us to load any piece of geometry in here. So we're going to drag that up and replace the shape in there. Now to go back to text, because it doesn't know what the geometry is supposed to be. Then right up here, you'll have a button where you can pick, okay, and then you're going to pick your group of your fibers, and then it's going to drop them out there. So you're going to get something like this. Okay. Now see how they're all kind of weirdly rotated and everything. Okay. And what's actually happening right here is it's throwing them together as groups. Okay. So the two things we need to fix is we wanted to not use them as a group, and we want them to not to rotate them over. Okay. So what you're going to do is, on your, shape instance, there's a button right here which says group members. So when I click on this, then it's going to treat each one of these as an individual piece and not throw them as groups. Then on your rotation, it's got a random 3D, and what we want is random horizontal, which means it'll keep them all upright, but it's rotating them in a 360-degree axis on the top. Okay. So what I mean is it's rotating them around like this. Okay. So go back over that on the shape instance. We don't want it to treat them as groups. We want to treat them as individuals. Now we grouped them, and the reason we did it that way was it allowed us to have multiple objects in here. Okay. So multiple objects with multiple attributes to put in here. Now, another thing that's kind of nice about this right now is you can see that these fibers are going to be too big. Well, you have a scale in here, so I can start scaling these down so I can control the final size. Plus, I have a variation in here that I can play with so that they vary in their scale. Okay, so not all our fibers are going to be the same size. Okay, so you have to play with it till you get them the size that you want. Okay. So now we can go back up here, and we can go back to our birth, and we can put how many that we want in here. Okay. And I'm going to go for 25,000. Okay. Now, what's going to happen here is if we were looking down, we're going to see all these pockets in here, and we know that a carpet doesn't have those pockets, but we're probably never going to be shooting that way. We're always going to be shooting from an angle like this. And so it seems like that's quite a few particles. Okay. All right. So now the next thing we want to do, that we've got those all set up this way, is now we want to convert this to geometry. So we don't want it to be a particle system anymore. Okay. So to do that, we're going to come in here, go to your create menu, and you're going to change from particle systems here to compound objects. And you're going to get a thing called a mesher right here. Okay. All you have to go do is go out in your viewport, click, hold down and drag, and you can make an icon. Doesn't matter how big the icon is. Doesn't really matter where it's placed. It doesn't really matter. Okay. It's just an icon. So now you're going to go to your modify panel, and then right here where it says pick object, you're going to click on that, and then you pick this particle system. And then what it's going to do is it's going to create a copy of our particles as geometry over here. Okay. Okay, so once we do that, then we're going to right click and convert that to an editable poly. It'll take a second for it to convert it to that from the mesher. Okay, now it's an editable poly. And so now you've used a particle system to generate that. Now, I want to generate some more fibers, okay? So what I'm going to do is I want twice as many as I have in there. So what I'm going to do is to come back to the particle system, and I want to generate another set, but I don't want them sitting in the same places. Okay. So I want to fill in some of these gaps. Okay. And I didn't want to create this. I mean, it's going to give me 50,000 pieces, and I didn't want 50,000 because I'm going to come in here and I'm going to optimize these, and it's really going to crunch my machine. So I really want them as two separate entities. Okay. So now, using the exact same settings, what I can do is come down here to my position object. Okay. Go to your position object. And this is, placing the particles on our object. Okay. And you can go down here where it says, it's got a random seed. And then if I click this new button right here, you'll see that it's changing the position of them. So it doesn't change any nature to them. They're all the same. Their proportions and everything is the same. It's just changing where they're being aligned. Okay. So all we care is, we don't care what the number is. We just can't, care that it's not the same that it was. Okay. So that's given us the same amount, but they're in different positions now. And so what we want to do is now come in here and put another mesher in here, and we'll convert those. Okay, so there's another group. Okay, so now I'm going to convert those to an editable poly. Okay, it'll take a second to do that. Okay, there it goes. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is to go back to our particle system. Okay, that's 6 on the keyboard to bring it back up. And I'm just going to turn this off right now. Okay, we'll turn these off so they're no longer functioning, and that'll get rid of our particles. Okay, so I don't want to delete it because I might want to come back to it later. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and just hide that. Okay, so now we can go ahead and hide these little fibers now. Now we don't want to delete those. We may want to use them again. Okay, now by the way, those are instances. So when we use the particle system, if I had the particle system on in here and I deleted those, it would delete all the particles because the particles are an instance of that piece of geometry. But now that I've meshed these, I don't have that situation anymore. Okay, so now I can come back in here and I can use my alignment tool and I can align these and move them back into their position. And now I have all of these fibers in here. Okay. And actually, I should have just aligned them on the X and Y and not the Z because it pulled them down, but I'll just pull those back up. Okay, so that's how I got my particles in there. Okay, the next thing I wanted to go into before I actually get into doing the surfacing is we need to manipulate these a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to isolate one of these pieces. Okay, and if you look up in the right hand corner here, I've got this set up that when I choose these, it can tell you how many polygons are in it. You can see this has got 4 million, almost 5 million polygons in it, which is way too much. So what I'm going to do is come in here and I'm going to come down and get a little util in here called Pro Optimizer. Okay. What Pro Optimizer does is allows us to crunch down a piece of geometry. Okay. So once you get it, we're going to click this calculate button and it's going to take a little bit to calculate it. I'm going to hit the pause button while this is calculating. It'll take 2 or 3 minutes to do it. Okay, once it finished calculating the geometry, then I can come down here and can tell it what kind of count I want. I'm going to do it by percentage, and I'm going to say 20%. So what it's going to do is go in here, and it's going to kick these down so that these polygons are down 20%. So it's dropping it down from almost 5 million to about 800,000 polys on here. Now it's crunching these, and they look kind of weird, but really they're going to look more like fibers. They're less tubular looking, okay? And so this is serving two parts by doing this. First of all, it's limiting the amount of polygons. It's really crunching it back down. And it's also giving me a little bit more of a fiber look to it. So at that point, then I just go ahead and collapse that in, convert it to an editable poly. It'll take a second to do that. And now I've optimized that. Okay. So, you know, by the way, when we're doing this, I didn't really discuss this. When you're creating this rug, you should not be creating it in your environment. Okay. This crunches the machine too much. You should create the rug in a new file. And then once you have the rug done, you know, merge that into your file. Okay. So then I would do the same thing to my, other piece. Okay. All right. So, now what I want to show you is, this base piece. All right, this is the base of the rug, okay? I want to kind of bust this up too, okay? So what I'm going to do is convert this to an editable mesh, and then in Max, I'm going to run a thing in here called Quadify Mesh, which will turn this into quads, okay? Then I'm going to put a mesh smooth on it. I'm going to turn my isoline display off so I can truly see the geometry. And then I'm going to subdivide it, say maybe 3 times. Okay. I'm going to, you know, convert that in, bake all that in. And now I'm going to come in and put a noise on this. Okay. What I want to do is I don't want this to be completely flat. Okay. So I'm going to come in and put a noise on this, and then we're going to do a similar thing we did before, in which that we're going to be pushing it up. We want a fractal. We want it fairly small. Okay, and all I'm trying to do is to bust up the ground so it's not completely flat. Okay, so when I'm seeing it in between the fibers, it's not completely flat. Okay, now, same problem I had before, you can see this noise is affecting the bottom of it. So what I'm going to do here is go back to my poly. I'm going to pick the border on it. Okay, so I'm picking that border. Then I'm holding down my control key and clicking on a vertex, and that will convert it to a vertex selection. Then control I to invert it. So now it's going to add the noise to everything but that bottom set of vertices. Okay. And then I'm going to bake that in, convert it to editable poly. Okay. Now this is going to give me a more of an irregular shape to my rug, which is what I want underneath that. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to run a Pro Optimizer on this. Okay. Now, it's going to give me some shading anomalies, but I don't really care because I can fix that if they bother me, but they won't because I'm going to have all those fibers on it. Okay, so then I'm going to go ahead and convert that to an editable poly. So that's going to help the areas in between my particles, that if I'm seeing the rug in there, that it's not completely flat, that it's a regular shape, and that'll make for a better piece. Okay. So before we get into texturing, then what you want to do is to bust up this ground plane so that it's a little more irregular. Then you want to optimize your fibers so they're more fibrous looking, less geometry, and then you're ready to go into the surfacing. So now let's kind of talk about what I did to actually surface these. Okay. All right. So let's go over here and I'll just show you what I started with. Okay. So then all I did was I set this up with my particles, and I just put a shader on them at first, and then I just made another plane and put some wood on that. Okay. So all I really did was at that point, I'll bring up my material editor. Okay. Now, Maya comes with a set of pre-made shaders. Okay. We can use our Arch and Design, which I use quite a bit, but for what I'm going to do right now, I come in to these pre-made shaders down in here. Okay. And so I come down and I went into the one called Fabric. Okay. We can get different kinds of fabric in here. So under Fabric, there's lots of different choices that you can do. Okay. What I got was this linen beige. Okay. I just wanted kind of a neutral kind of beige color. Okay. That's what I was looking for. So, it looks like this. Okay. That's what I'm going to initially put on it. Now, I don't really want to use this shader. The only reason I brought it out here was because it had this bitmap in here and I wanted to use this bitmap. Okay. Sometimes I use these shaders, but in this case, I'm not going to use the shader. Now, Maya puts an additional node in here. So it's a bitmap node that the bitmap is floating in. And I really don't want that. All I really want is the bitmap. So I'm just going to pull this out of here just to use this bitmap. And then I don't really need this node anymore. I was just wanting to get this bitmap for it. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to use an Arch and Design material. Okay. This is going to be my carpet. You really should be naming all of your shaders. And then we have templates in here, okay? And I'm just going to go to this top one, matte finish, because I don't want this to be very glossy, okay? And then I'll plug that into my diffuse slot. And that's what I'm going to put on the carpet and the ground, all of this, okay? So I'm going to apply that to it, okay? Now, we don't have a mapping coordinate on that, okay? We need a mapping coordinate. So I'm just going to come on from the top view, and I'm going to place a UVW map on this. By default, it will want to snap to the entire piece, and this bitmap is square. Okay, so I'm going to want it to be square. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make it a 1 foot by 1 foot square, which is actually kind of big. I don't think I have this in scale, but it's okay. Okay, so I'll pull this gizmo up so you can kind of see it. Okay, so that's going on both sets of fibers and to the ground itself. Okay, and that's fine. Okay, now we just wanted to make a ground plane. So all I did was I made a plane. And then I just place this in the center of the plane. And then for the ground texture, I did pretty much the same thing. I'm going to go down here, pull out another Arch and Design. This is going to be my wood floor. Okay, I'm going to get a preset for that too. We'll go down to, let's go ahead and close fabric. We're going to go to flooring, wood. And then we're going to pull some wood out here. You can make any, choice that you want in here. I think I'm going to go for this, maybe go for one of these, silver maples. Okay. Give me something like that. But it's the same thing in here. I don't really want to use this node. I just want to get this wood from it. So I'm just going to drag in here. And now I've gotten this node that I want. That's the wood. You can use any kind of wood that you want. I was kind of looking for a dark wood. And then over on my presets on my Arch and Design, okay, I'm going to go for, I think I'm going to go for probably going to go for a matte finish on that. Yeah. And then I'm probably going to add some gloss to it, but then I'll plug that into my diffuse and then I can put that on the ground. Okay. That's a little flat, so I think I'm going to change that to this satin varnished wood right here. And that'll give me a little bit more gloss to it. Now, it's got its own nodes in here, and I don't want any of these nodes. I'm just going to delete those, put my wood back in there. That gives me a good sheen on that, okay? So that's what I'm going to put on the floor, okay? All right, so that's what got me this, okay? So I rendered that, and this is what I have right there. So that's that one shader on there and then another shader on there, okay? Now, the next thing I wanted to play with is the idea of putting some color on this to make this a little bit more exciting, okay? So I came back in and I added some color to it. So it went from there to there, and I wanted to show you how I did that. Okay, so what I did was, we're just going to pick, let's hide our plane for right now. And I just want to go ahead and group these together, this rug together. And what I'm going to do now is put another UVW map on this all together as a group, okay? And then I'm going to want this on channel 2 because I've already got this other one on channel 1. So I want these to be different coordinates, okay? So now all I'm going to do is hit print screen because I need to take this into Photoshop. Okay, so then we need to bring that into Photoshop. So we'll just make a new file here and we'll paste that in. And let's just crop here. Okay, so then I want to come in here and crop right to this orange line. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to just pretty much crop to that line. And that way I can create a bitmap to go on our object that matches it. Okay, so that's what I have here. Okay, this is what I've already done. Okay. Then what I did was I came in here and created a rectangle in the center. Okay. So I just went down here. I'll turn this off. I just went right down here, you know, get a rounded corner rectangle. I put some guides in here to get the size that I wanted and then drew this in. And then, of course, you can change your attributes to, you know, how round you want the corner and everything. Okay. So that's what I did. And then I came back in and I, underneath that, filled that with a color that I want around the border. So I wanted it to be tan in the center, that kind of linen that we got. And then it's going to be the teal color around the outside. Okay. And that's how I added the color in there. Okay. So in Max, on my carpet here, I just came in and did a composite node, added a second layer, plugged this in, and then added my bitmap into that second layer. Okay. Okay, and let's see, I put it, and so there it is. And then I'm going to change this to overlay. and then that's going to get that linen kind of laying over the top of it. Okay. And that's how I got my next stage, which was that. Okay. Now, the next thing I wanted to do was to have some bump on this because, this looks really flat. Okay. So I wanted some bump in those. So what I did was I opened up this piece of wood that I'm using here, and I'm going to create some lines in here for my bump. Okay. So what I'm really doing is coming in here and just drawing. I'm holding down the shift key and I just draw a black line across. Okay. And then I'm just lining that up. Okay. I'm holding the shift, alt key down and using the down arrow to make a copy. Line that up and then just keep doing that till I have them all the way down. Okay. I'm also putting one at the top too, so that these tile. So it can be tiled. Then the other thing I'm doing is once I have these, okay, by the way, get it 100%, then I'm going to take one of these, I'm going to duplicate this, one of these lines, Control T, and then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, okay, and then this is going to get me my vertical lines, okay, so just going to delete part of this. And then I just want a small line that goes from there to there. So just delete that. And now I have these small lines. Okay. So there's one right here. Hold down the Shift Alt. And then I'm going to put one over there and Shift Alt to make a copy, and then there's one over there. Okay, then I can put those three in a group, then hold Shift Alt, arrow down, and then I can make another group, and then I have to move those over to align where they need to align. And you just keep doing that process. Okay. You keep doing that process until you have enough lines to cover the whole thing. So now I'm putting white in here. And so then there is the lines placed in. So your bump is, we want white on black. Your bump is white is up, black is down. Okay. And so basically I use this, it's going to place those down there. Now, a thing that I do is I'll once I have that, then I copy it all to one layer. Then I duplicate that layer and I do a blur on it. Okay, so it has a slight blur, so that's going to filter, blur, a Gaussian blur, real small blur probably of 1, and then I lay the other one back on top of it on darken, so it's got a little bit of a soft edge. You don't want your bumps to be totally crisp, okay? So that has the turn these layers off so we only see the white. Okay, so there it is, blurred, and I've got it at a 50%, and then I overlaid this back on top of it, and that got me my initial bump. Okay, so I just put the bump in our bump slot on our shader, and then it got me this. Okay, so it went from there to there. The only difference in these two is I put the bump in the bump slot, so that gave me some definition to the actual planks that are on the ground there. Okay. All right. The next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to play with this rug, and it's too perfect. Okay. It's too perfect. It looks pretty good, but it's too perfect. So I came in and roughed it up. Can you see the difference in this when I turn it on and off? Okay. I wanted to make it so it wasn't perfectly straight. Okay. So what I did was I added some noise to it. Okay. Okay. So what I did was I took these two pieces here, okay, and I'm going to temporarily take those mapping coordinates off of them for right now. And what I'm going to do is to come in here and put what's called a volume select modifier on this. Okay. Now what this allows me to do is to be able to select certain parts of this to apply my noise to. Okay. Now the reason I'm doing that, and matter of fact, let me just back up and show you why I'm going to do that. If I come in here right now and I put a noise on this, okay, all I'm going to do is place a noise on the Z axis. Okay, so I'm going to start placing some noise on the Z axis. I'm going to turn this to fractal, and I'm going to turn this way down, the scale of this way down. Okay, maybe something like 10. Okay. Now what this is going to do is start causing this to go up and down. Okay. Can you see how it's getting a roughness to it as it's going up and down? And I'm changing I'm only changing the Z. I don't want it going left and right. I just want it going up and down. Okay. So you can see how that's kind of messing that up. But what it's also doing is it's affecting the bottom of this. So it's going to be pulling off from the rug. Okay. So we don't want that to happen. We only want it to be affecting the top of it, but not the bottom of it. Okay. So we're going to cut that off of here. So what I'm going to do is add a volume select, because a volume select allows me to tell it what part of this object I want it to be affected by a modifier on top of it. So we'll go to the front view here. So on this volume select, okay, I'm going to tell it to affect vertices. Okay. And then by default, it's picking all the vertices. Then I'm going to click on Gizmo right here. And that's going to let me move this gizmo up to tell it what to affect. Okay. And I want to get it up probably about maybe halfway, something like that. Okay. It'll be a little sluggish as you do this. Okay. So now that's going to only affect this part, but that's a pretty stark shift from where it's affecting, not affecting. So we want to feather that. So you're going to go in here and click use soft selection, and then it's going to it's going to fall off. Okay. Now by default, this selection is really high. So you're going to want to turn that down. And what you're looking for is the blue. The blue is where it's not being affected. Okay. So I'm going to come down further. And I think I'm going to go down a little bit further. Okay. So the red is going to be affected, and then it's going to fall off to here, but these down here will not be affected. Okay. So now I can paste that noise back on, and the noise is only going to affect the part up there, and it's not going to affect any of this down here. So it's not going to allow the, this noise to pull it off. And so what it's going to do is just rough up that edge and rough up going across the across the particle system, this mesh. And so that's what's going to get you that roughness there. Okay. So that's the difference between this and that. These are all subtle differences, but the difference between making something that's very stunning and just making average stuff is doing little bitty things in here. Okay. So that got me it to look a little bit more organic. Okay. The next thing I did is I wanted to bust up this wood a little bit. Okay. I've got the bump in the creases. Okay. But there's actually a little bit of a texturing going on because I want this to be kind of a roughness to it. Okay. So I came back and I played with the bump and the roughness setting. Notice how this is getting a little bit darker in here, a little less saturated. Okay. What I did in my shader. Go over here and look at this shader. Okay, this is the shader that's on the wood. And what I did was I came in and I created another bitmap that looked like this. Okay. And this is going to go into my roughness slot. Okay. And how I created that was, I copied the wood itself, the wood from down here. I copied it and put it up above it and above the cracks. And then I changed it. I desaturated it. So I went to image, adjustments, desaturated. So I turned it to black and white. And then I turned it to a difference and I turned it down so that I got a slight darkness to it here. Okay. And what I did for that is I made a second bump out of that. That's how I'm getting that other bump that I have in. So that got me, this was my original bump. And by doing that, I got something like this. Now I wanted this to be very light in here because I just wanted a slight area where it's starting to rough that up. So it's pretty subtle. And that's how I got that extra little bump that's in there where it's breaking up some of that area in there. That's how I got that. Okay. And then for the, turn those off. Okay, so then I made a copy of that, put it back on top of it. Okay, this was on a difference at 50%. I put another one on top of that, difference at 100%. And then I took my lines that I had. I took these lines, matter of fact, both of these, I copied and merged them down. And then I placed them on a layer and inverted it. So it gave me black on white. Then I came in and turned that to lighten and I dropped that back on top. And that's what got me this, which I put in the roughness. Now, the reason I needed white lines is because the roughness, it's white is positive and black is negative. So I didn't want it to be glossy down in the grooves. I want it to be glossy up top, but not in the grooves. So I want it to be rougher in the grooves. So that's white. So anything that's light in here will have more of less glossiness to it, and the dark areas will have more glossiness to it. Okay. That's put in our roughness slot. And that's the subtle difference between this and that, adding a little more detail into the floor. Now, the last thing I did was I thought this color of this was too uniform. So just, you'll see a subtle shift here as I turn this on and off that I've messed with the subtlety of the color of this, that it was too even and too uniform. I wanted it to look like it was a little more busted up. So what I did on that is I came in and made a layer, and then I had my two colors in here, this, these two colors. And then on that layer, I did a gradient ramp, and I used a ramp that from the center. Okay. And it got me that. And then what I did is I ran a difference clouds on those. So that's under render difference clouds. Okay. I ran it once, it gives me that. Then you run it again. Okay. So run it again. And now it gets you back to these colors. And now I put those back on top of these as a stain. So I used it with a luminosity of 19% over the top of the whole thing, which got me some darkness to it. I wanted a little more on the green, so I actually brought it down and put it on top of the green. Now, the one on top is luminosity at 19%. You just have to kind of figure out what you want. And then down below it, so it's only darkening this area, I did luminosity at 30%. And so it ended up giving me a map that looked like this, so that I have some slight shifts in the color of it. And that's what got me this final render like this. Okay, let's start from the beginning. So there it is where I've got the particle system on there just with the claw shader and the wood shader on there. Added some color to it with the bitmap. Then came back in and put a bump on the floor. Then came back in and added some noise to the rug. That really brought this rug to life. It doesn't seem as digital now. Okay, that was a huge shift. Okay, added a little bump and roughness to the floor. And then last thing, add a little bit of a stain onto the rug so it wasn't so uniform in color. Okay. So if we just look at the difference in the rug, this is the rug with the color on it. And look at how much the rug shifted here between the roughness and the color on it. And it looks much more realistic. This kind of looks digital a little bit, and it looks much more realistic there. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, that this particular technique really only works when you're using a camera that when you would normally shoot an environment from. You normally would shoot an environment from holding a camera about 4 or 5 feet off the ground. And so you have a certain angle that you're getting to when you're shooting this. Okay. Now, there is a situation you can get into where it's going to fall apart a little bit. So if you're shooting angles where you're a little bit higher up like this, you'll see that there's pockets in here where we don't have particles. Okay. Now we could go back and generate more and more particles to put in here, but that just slows our render time down. So I have kind of a little technique, a little cheat that I do, which will fill this in and make it look pretty good, but it won't cost me anything in render time. It takes me a little time to set it up initially, but then in renders, if you're doing an animation, you'll save a lot of time. So one of the first things I do is I want to fill in these little gaps in here. Okay, I want to fill them in so that they don't just look flat. Right now we're just seeing our flat polygon in there. Now we did rough that base geometry up a little bit, but we want to place a bitmap on there. So the first thing I do is go out and get some shag carpet, okay, bitmap. So I found something like this, okay, and then then I want to make this tileable, so I do my offset, and then I want to come in here and paint out the seams so I can get a nice kind of a tileable texture. Now it's not going to be our end up in front of us. It's going to be down below. So if it's got a little bit of tiling in it, you're not going to really see that. But for the most part, I want to try to make it, pretty tileable image. Okay, then you're going to come back and you're going to place that back on top of the base rug in Max. Okay, so here it is in Max. So you can see I've placed it on there, and you can see a little bit of tileable, issues in there. But in the end, that's not, I don't spend a lot of time on that. If this was just, I was going to do a trick where I was just going to put this on and that was going to be it, then I would spend more time on that. But a lot of times I see people spend all this time making these perfectly, tileable maps, when in the end, you're never going to see any of that. So I don't waste time on that. It's all about time and money. That's one of the reasons I don't use the hair and fur system for doing something like a short shag rug, because It's real slow at rendering. Now, the hair and shag is pretty good for things like hair rugs, like alpaca and rugs like that. Okay, so I might use it for that. But for a short pile kind of shag, a short shag, I don't use it for that. Okay, so anyway, so we put this in here, and basically I create a new shader for that. So initially I had the same shader on the particle system and the rug, but now I'm going to shift that. And what I'm doing is I just made a copy of that same shader so it had the same attributes. And then I'm just replacing my initial node that I had that's on the actual carpet, which is this one. I replaced the one that's on the rug, the base piece, with that one that I've created. Otherwise, these shaders are the same, and it still has the same structure. It's got the same stain going back on top of that. That's all the same that's going in there. So the composite's the same, we're just laying that overlay on top of that pattern to still get that coloration on it, okay? So in this initial one, I hadn't done that yet, or I have, but you just can't see it because I'm just looking at the rug right now. Now, it will need its own mapping coordinates, okay? So you'll have to make sure that you put your own mapping coordinates on that. So in this particular case, the original one, I had this on channel 1. Okay, I had the original pattern on channel 1. So on this one, I'm going to end up putting this on channel 2. Okay, that way when I go in here, I can put a new mapping coordinate on channel 2, and then I can size it whatever size that I want to get it on there. Okay, so I put it on there, and then I can come in here and adjust this gizmo to get it down to the size that I want that to be, okay, that I think is appropriate. Okay, then at that point, when you render it, what's going to happen is okay, it will look like this. So here is that render straight out without the fur, without the particle system on top of it. And I've got a pretty good sized bump on it. It's a bigger bump than you would normally put on it because I want kind of some of those dark areas in it. And you can see this doesn't look too good, by itself. Okay. But when you drop it in, now you can see some of these pockets are starting to fill in. And so I'll show you before and after. That's before, and that's with the texture that's in there. And you'll see that starts really filling that in pretty nice. Okay. Much better so that you can get a shot from up here and it looks pretty nice. But I don't stop there. Okay. The next thing that I do is now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to go from a top view. Okay. And I'm going to render it straight down from a top view. Okay. Like this. So I'm just going to go to the top view and render this rug. And I don't need a really extremely high resolution. Okay. But, I render it straight down. It's got neutral lighting. So in other words, I've got 4 lights that are shining straight down on this. So I do want the shadowing that's in here, but I don't want shadows really coming from one direction or the other. I want them to come straight down. So this has 4, photometric light shining straight down on it. So I get a nice shadow structure, but it's not off to one direction or the other because eventually I'm going to rotate this. Okay. All right. So once I have this rendered, then I'm going to take this and copy it. So select the whole thing and copy it. And then I'm going to go back onto my original, color piece. This is my original color stain that I did for it. And I'm just going to paste this back on top of here. Okay, once I have this in here, then what I'm going to do is to move this and line it back up on top of this. Okay, so what I'm really concerned about right here is that my tan parts line up again with this, my snaps here. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just going to non-proportional scale it. Now, I tell people all the time not to non-proportional scale things, or for the most part, that's what I believe. But for this particular case, I'm going to cheat because I need this to align up, and it won't make any difference because this is going to be down below it anyway. So what I'm trying to do is just align this up. And if it's not perfect, it's okay. It doesn't really matter. It's just got to be close. Okay, so I'm going to set that in. All right, now I got to get rid of this little dark band that's around here, and you can go in if you want to, and you can use like a clone tool, and come in here and clone this, and get this cloned out of here. You can do that. Okay. I don't really do it for this. So what I do is I go ahead and I'm just going to cheat on this, and I'm just going to select this area, and then I'm going to do Control T, which I'll select that. And then I'm just going to scale that out a little bit. And am I stretching it? Yes, I am. But in the end, you won't be able to tell. And this is a much faster way to do this. So I'll just go around the whole thing, picking these little edges and just pulling them out a little bit so that I'm just trying to make sure that I don't get any of that flooring showing up in my final piece. So I'm going to pull that out like that. Okay, and so that looks pretty good. Now, I've got some little areas in the corners right here which aren't exactly right, but that's okay because this is a rounded rug. We don't really see those corners. Okay, so now what I'll do is go ahead and select this whole thing and copy it and then paste it back on. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to rotate this 180 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to go to transform, rotate 180 degrees. Okay, and this is one of the reasons I want kind of a neutral lighting, because I'm going to rotate this at 180 degrees. And if I had an angular lighting on this, then it would make some funky shadows on here. But what I'm trying to do is to make sure that these kind of low pockets that are in here, we don't have much texturing, is not doesn't align. So I rotate this whole thing. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to project this back down. Okay, so I'm going to come back and project this as my base texture. So I'm going to replace this node. Okay, now that I've rendered the first pass, I'm going to replace it with this node. Okay, so I'm going to come in here now. And replace that node. Now, in the reality of this is at this point, I really don't need this composite. I really can go just straight in with this because I've already baked that information in. So it's probably cleaner at this point just to take this out, run this straight in for the bump and on this. Okay. And then we're going to, of course, it will need to be changed to, it'll need its own mapping channel. Let's do, say, 3. And we'll put a new mapping channel on that and make this one 3 because it needs to snap to the whole edge of it. And let's go ahead and just show this in our viewport. And so you can see that back down on there. Okay. Now that's going to help me tremendously when I do my renders. So when I render that out, okay, it's going to look something like this. Okay. So there is that hair. And I've got a pretty good bump on this. I'm running it a pretty good size bump. Normal, not normal. More normal than you would use if you were just doing a normal bump like on a boot or something. We're cranking it up pretty good. And then that's going to get you this. And now that rug looks pretty darn good. Okay, you can shoot it from here. Now, one of the things that I have a tendency to do is, we might run an ambient occlusion on this, which we probably would. But one of the things I do is on the bump, when I did the original bump, I really crank the bump really, I mean, extremely high, and I get something like this, which is a little bit darker, and doesn't look good at all by itself. Okay, so this is cranking the bump up pretty high. This is cranking it up like insanely high. Okay, but the difference is what it looks like once it's rendered. Okay, here's the one that we just did, and then with that extremely high bump, it looks like this. Okay, I'll turn that on and off. So you can see it's giving these little darker areas in there, which is almost like it's an ambient occlusion. It's just making it seem like it's more dense. Okay. So let's look at, here's what your original one that the whole tutorial was built on. But when we go this angle, it's falling apart. Here's what it looks like once I've done this little trick. And this is just a shader trick. So I didn't add any more particles, but it seems like this rug is fully dense right now. Okay. So it's a little trick. Takes a few minutes to, to render it out and to get it. But now it doesn't cost you any more rendering time when we're rendering animation. Okay. So it's a pretty nice little trick to get us, a denser look. Now, for those extreme, for these normal streaming angles, it's not going to give you a tremendous amount more, but it is a little bit. And you'll see it mostly in this edge right here. So here is the same angle rendered back out with that final texture put on it. And you'll see a little bit of difference along the edge here, but it's not a tremendous amount of difference. And if you have furniture in here, I'm not sure how much you see it. But anyway, that's what it looks like from this angle. But I really do this when I'm shooting from some down angle, like if I'm shooting down on a coffee table and I have some books or something like that, then I want a more lush look than what we were getting from the original piece. Okay. So, cause if I was shooting down on this, I couldn't let this go. This just doesn't look right, but this will give us a nice lush, feel, a nice lush look, but it doesn't cost us, any more in render time. Okay, so hopefully that helped you understand a way. It's not the only way that you can do a rug like this, but this is a pretty nice way, and it gets you a very irregular kind of look. Looks a lot like a rug, a shag rug. And of course, you can adjust, how thick you want it and everything in your particle system. Okay, hope that gave you some ideas. Thank you very much.